Welcome, everybody. My name is Ruth Zamir. Today's session is a chat with Brad Templeton and Doron Elinav. They're going to be talking about teleoperation, remote operation, teleassist, why do driverless vehicles need them, and how are they done? Just before we dive into the subject, yes, this session is being recorded, and you're going to receive a copy later. In addition to that, we have time for Q&A at the end, but please send your questions throughout the session. And if possible, maybe we'll address them in the session, and we're going to address as many as possible at the end. So our speakers today, or our discussioners today, Brad Templeton founded the world's first .com back in 1989. Today he's chairman emeritus and futurist for the Economic Frontier Foundation, founding faculty and computing chair at Singularity University, and writes, consults, and speaks on the future of self-driving cars, transportation, and cities through his site, robocars.com. Speaking with him will be Doron Elinav, who's co-founder and VP Product and Business Development in DriveU Auto. Previous to that, he held various leadership positions in companies that deal with perception, based on raw data sensor fusion, and he also worked in Gilat Satellite Networks in executive and management positions. So, without further ado, we're going to be handing the conversation over to Brad and to Doron.
So good morning or good evening to everyone, depending what time zone you're in. A few technical notes in the Zoom webinar. Some people who are panelists are not visible, and there's a little checkbox you can use to make their video not show, so you can see all the pretty people you want to see in bigger boxes. I want to talk about today, DriveU has asked me to come in and talk about the issues about remote assistance and remote operation for self-driving vehicles. So, of course, most of the focus that you do see is on how to actually make the vehicles drive themselves, be safe, operate on our roads, and this produces a lot of value. And I was actually a little bit skeptical about the use of remote operation, at least at detailed levels at first, mainly because this is not what you might call the brass ring. The real prize to make a vehicle that you can just say, go to that address and it goes there without any human being involved. That's the goal of most of the teams out there, but nonetheless, it turns out that when you talk about this to people, they'll always come up and they'll ask this question, okay, what's the car going to do if this happens? Or what's the car going to do if that happens? What if it's some situation that needs human natural intelligence in order to be solved? And so because we want to get these vehicles out and operating sooner, it turns out that leaving some of these edge cases to human assistance can make a lot of sense when you're in areas where the bandwidth is available. And as time goes on, bandwidth just continues to get better, network connectivity continues to get better, and so these solutions become practical. And so everybody's using it. This is a little video, and I mean, actually, we don't think we really need the sound on it, so let's mute that. I don't even know if you're hearing it. This is a video of someone riding in a Waymo, and I will make it a little bit bigger. And if I'm spotlighted, you'll see this better. And you notice it's going into a parking lot to drop someone off, and what it sees is a Christmas tree lot. And some may know that at December, some of the stores fill up their parking lots with Christmas trees to sell. So here it thinks it should be able to drive through the parking lot, and it's seen this. Now the screen is flashing to indicate the vehicle just doesn't understand why there are trees in the middle of its road, and it's asking the remote assistance people to look out the cameras of the vehicle, and those remote assistance people quickly tell it, no, back up a little bit, and then go to the left and take the next lane. Nothing too complex or amazing. They're not driving the car. They're just, you may see a person in there with their hands near the wheel. That's a safety driver. This video was done, I guess, a couple of years ago when they still did that at Waymo. And now the vehicle goes and takes the alternate route through the parking lot, and the problem is solved when programming an AI to understand that suddenly trees can appear in the middle of your road might not be something that the programmers originally thought to do. So we're seeing more and more need for this. Another company that I was involved in developing is an Estonian company called Starship. And hopefully you've seen Starship's robots. As you can see, they're very small and run on the sidewalk. They take groceries, food, and so on for people from place to place. Now, because these robots are so small and light, they can stop in 30 centimeters and they're not on the road, so they don't present much physical safety problem. But when we began this company, we wanted to do two things. We wanted to build an autonomous robot that could go and deliver without needing humans so that it could be very inexpensive to deliver. But we also wanted to get on the road as soon as possible, working with customers, delivering for stores, and interacting with the public. And the way to do that, even when our robot was not very good at autonomy, was to use remote assistance. Again, never remote driving of the vehicle. Actually, the very first times we went out, we had a human being walk or jog behind the vehicle in order to make sure that it was doing the right thing. And what was built at Starship was a system, and I'll go back to me, a system to allow the vehicle to ask for help when it runs into something that it doesn't understand. And because it's small and light, it can just stop. It asks for help. And in the beginning, the vehicles were only autonomous a small portion of the time. And they've only grown and grown to the point that they're 99% autonomous. And in fact, quite often, Starship now reports a robot goes out for a whole day without ever calling for help. But some robots do call for help. What that means is they only need to hire one operator for, every 50 robots or every 100 robots. And so the cost of the human being becomes quite manageable, and you can have economic delivery while still having human beings solve those unusual problems. And you see these unusual problems or difficult problems in just about everything. A loading dock, I think we're going to hear a little bit about. It's a very chaotic situation with big, heavy trucks and people walking around. It makes sense if you're going to automate a truck traveling across a continent that it doesn't actually need much human assistance when it's driving on a very controlled freeway. But when it tries to get off the freeway and go into the loading dock, that's when it might need it. And to have a human being in it for the entire trip just to get to the loading dock would not meet the economic goals of truck automation. And that's led people to do things. Now, we've also seen, and this is just a brief video, and you see these 4 flashing lights on the car. This is a cruise vehicle in San Francisco that a friend of mine was riding in, and it got stuck for a little while. And the cruise vehicles put on their flashers and pause, and they ask for remote assistance. Or, as we'll talk about later, sometimes the remote assistance doesn't help them. So that's just a quick summary of why you want to be able to do this. You want to be able to get out on the road and be autonomous without being perfect, without being able to handle everything. You must absolutely be safe. You must absolutely make sure you can operate safely without a human being's assistance. And when you're moving at speed, you cannot call or depend on the network to help solve a problem. But there are all kinds of problems where safety isn't the issue. They're at low speed. There are situations where a human being can be asked for help and provide that help. Now, DriveU is a company that makes technology for that. And they, in fact, have sort of put together, if people hear me talk about the levels that people talk about in self-driving, I'm not a fan of those because I think those were not designed well. But in order to understand how remote assistance works, it turns out there's a lot of different modes that it can be done in. And we're going to bring Doron in if he wants to turn his video on and share his screen and talk about all the different ways that people do this. They make technology to do this. And here we see some screen going in. So let's hear about that. And then we're going to get into some of the issues and problems which occur, and then some back and forth discussion and some Q&A.
Thank you, Brad. So when we're talking with companies developing autonomous driving, we often encounter an issue with what is defined by teleoperations. So many people call it teleassist, remote operations, remote driving, teleoperations, and so forth. And one of the reasons that one of the things that we discovered was that the taxonomy is very complex and very difficult. So here's a proposal for how to define maybe the different types or modes of teleoperation. And I'll begin with a small example of a truck driving from a warehouse to a logistics center, and going along the drive, see the different issues that require human assistance. And as Brad said, this is mostly or almost always mission accomplishment related rather than safety issues. So safety issues needs to be addressed by the vehicle itself, but mission accomplishment issues should be or can be supported by a remote operator instead of having the vehicle stuck on the side of the road. So in this example, the truck is driving 99% of the time unsupervised and autonomously. There is no need for human assistance. And in this case, if it's 99% of the time, statistically, you can say only one operator per 100 trucks. But every once in a while, a remote operator is needed. And let's look at examples of where this can happen. So one example is in the logistics center itself. The logistics center is a very complex scenario and requires driving sometimes in reverse, sometimes in complicated regions, where the team that's developing autonomous driving might not focus on this specific scenario. Why? Because it's a very, very small percentage of the time. Critical, but minuscule in terms of time driven. So in this case, maybe the team that's developing the driver would forego having this developed completely and have a remote operator do, for example, the reverse driving or complicated maneuvers. In this case, many times we see what we call direct driving or T1. It is a remote steering wheel, remote pedals for acceleration and braking that are managed or operated by a remote pilot. This is usually for low speed operations in relatively well-defined areas and where a more virtual type of driving experience is more difficult. So in this case, the remote operator, again, just backs the truck to its position or does a complicated maneuver directly using the remote steering. Once the goods are on the truck, the container is connected, latched on to the semi-trailer or whatever, the truck goes on its way and starts driving. And there it experiences a second case where it needs some remote assistance. And this is getting on the highway. The on-ramp experience for some is nerve-wracking. And in this case, the autonomous driver is having some difficulty. So the remote operator is asked to intervene and to assist initiating the merge. In this case, there is no remote steering wheel or pedals, but there is maybe a joystick or a dial to speed up or slow down the truck. And the initiation of the changing lane is done by the remote operator. Of course, in this case, the truck maintains safety, makes sure that everything is done in a safe manner. And if, in this case, the remote pilot tries to initiate a merge in an unsafe way, the truck may override the instruction and stop the truck. But in our case, there were no problems, and the truck was able to get on the highway and driving on the highway autonomously for most of the drive. However, on the way, it experienced an unexpected scenario, an edge case. Police car in a strange situation that was not planned by the team that developed the autonomous driver, and a remote operator is required to intervene. In this case, maybe there's no need for direct driving or for the high-level control that we mentioned before, but maybe in this case, there's a need to assist in the path planning. It can be through waypoints, defining the waypoints for the truck around the obstacle, or maybe remove a restriction. Imagine there is a double yellow line that restricts moving to the other lane, but in this specific place, the policeman says it's okay. So the remote operator removes this restriction, enables the path planning of the truck to solve the case itself and continue driving. Of course, during this specific scenario, the remote pilot would most likely be supervising or making sure that there are no unforeseen issues in this scenario. Once this scenario has been overcome, the truck continues to drive until it gets off the truck and goes to an urban area on the direction of the warehouse. There it encounters a complex intersection where it's having problems entering, not sure what to do. In this case, the remote operator assists the vehicle, does not define the waypoints, but the vehicle, for example, queries, may I enter the intersection? The vehicle might say, I see a vehicle stuck in the intersection. May I enter in any case? And the remote operator gives a yes/no response. The default would be to wait and wait until the problem is solved. But if the remote operator sees that it is a safe case and the vehicle should be able to, for example, make an unprotected left turn or to make an entry into the intersection, then the remote operator will approve the action that the vehicle requested and the vehicle will continue to drive. In these cases, we followed 4 different cases for remote operations. We do see also a 5th case where it's not really a remote operation per se, but a supervision required by regulatory, for regulatory needs. For example, and this is just an example, maybe in the future, all driving of autonomous vehicles in a school zone will require a human to supervise to make sure that any unforeseen cases will not happen. And in this case, the vehicle will just be in what is called monitor mode. And the remote operator will be looking at the vehicle, making sure something unexpected does not happen. The remote operator will have the ability, probably in this case, to do a safe stop or to slow down the vehicle if something happens. But in most cases, or I would say practically all cases, the vehicle should be able to do all the safety related activities independent of the remote operator. In this way, we've covered what we think are the 5 different, we can call them modes of operation in a teleoperation scenario. And we find that using this more precise language for defining teleoperations assists everybody. It assists the company that's doing the the autonomous driving. It also assists in the company developing the teleoperation solutions, such as ourselves. It also assists in the pilot understanding what is the pilot's responsibility in each mode of operation. We can see a summary of what I described here in this table. And maybe I'll quickly go over this again, just to make sure that the terms are clear. So what we call, and maybe also highlight one of the examples that we did not mention, direct drive, what we call T0. In T0, which we do not think is applicable for vehicles in a public road or in any areas which are not enclosed or very slow driving vehicles. In T0, there is a direct drive. That means the remote operator directly activates the actuators inside the vehicle. There is practically no safety in the vehicle itself, and full control is done by the pilot. We see this as applicable only in very limited scenarios, such as low-speed robots, mining, agriculture, in well-defined areas which are limited for public to access. T1, low-level control. In this case, the pilot is doing a remote drive with a steering wheel and pedals. This is the example I gave, for example, inside the truck yard. In this case, it's usually relatively low-speed activity. It might be robots, for example, delivery robots on sidewalks typically use this type of control. It can, in this case, the vehicle is actually guided directly by the steering wheel pedals, and the instructions themselves are validated by a controller inside the vehicle, which validates, makes sure that the vehicle sees that the operation is safe, the command is safe. And if not, it always has the default MRM, or minimum risk maneuver. This is also what we expect to happen if, for example, connectivity is lost or there is some other issue in the teleoperations. An MRM, minimum risk maneuver, is initiated by the vehicle irrespective of the remote pilot, and the vehicle will, most cases, stop or move to the side of the road or whatever is the minimum risk maneuver. So in this case, we can see that actually the safety is under responsibility of the vehicle. If we go to a higher level, a more virtual remote control, what we call high-level control, while this is still remote drive, in this case, it is more controlling the vehicle in terms of lane or speed, and not the fine maneuvers that are done in a low-level control scenario. So in this case, maybe shift from one lane to another, define the target speed of the vehicle. So for example, I might say 20 miles an hour. I don't have to define if I now need to press the accelerator or I need to press the brake. This is all done internally inside the vehicle. So the low-level control is done by the vehicle itself, while the high-level control is done by the remote operator. In this case, still, the safety is under responsibility of the vehicle. And in case of a default or a problem, there is always the minimum risk maneuver, which the vehicle will initiate if some safety issue arises. Going to even higher level virtualization for the teleoperations, what we call guidance, or having the remote operator assist in the path planning process. In this case, for example, waypoints, which we described before, or maybe adding more information to the path planning process, or removing restrictions or limitations to the scenario, to the environment model of the vehicle, to enable the vehicle to do path planning by itself. So in this case, there is almost no real-time application by the remote operator. It is near real-time, but not real-time, assisting in the planning. And once the vehicle has a plan, it might be approved by the remote operator, and the vehicle will follow that trajectory based on the plan. If there is an issue, the MRM, of course, is initiated. The vehicle is responsible now, not only for the low-level control, the high-level control, the trajectory itself, but also the full plan, path planning of the vehicle. In this case, the input device would most likely be a keyboard, touch screen, and no need for a joystick or a steering wheel and pedals. T4, or maybe the highest level of remote operation, in this case, the remote operator advises or responds to queries that the autonomous driver needs assistance with. For example, may I enter the intersection? Or should I stop here? Or I have a flat tire. Should I continue to drive on the bridge, or should I stop even though it's a bridge? For example, so these might be complex questions, simple questions, but questions with more or less yes/no response, or multiple options, but limited number of multiple options. In this case, the autonomous driver is maybe most mature of all these cases, and the remote operator responds and supervises to make sure that the vehicle is operating correctly after the initiated request. So again, just as an example, we might have a vehicle that is ultra safe and designed to stop, even if, as some autonomous drivers say, even if a falling leaf is in front of the vehicle might stop. The remote operator will say, it's okay, keep going. Or for example, imagine that there's a carton or a box in front on the street. The vehicle will stop. The remote operator will say, it's okay to continue driving, or go around the box, it's okay, whatever is in the relevant case, and the vehicle will continue to drive. This is, again, most mature AI cases, complex cases where the vehicle needs some assistance, and responding to these queries is what is needed. The last option, which I mentioned previously, supervision, mostly because of regulatory requirements, where we see a need for human to monitor, to make sure that the vehicle is operating correctly. For the current modes of proof of concepts tests that we see in the world today, many times regulatory bodies require some sort of supervision for all autonomous drivers, irrespective of their maturity, and we provide this. In these cases, usually there is only a safe stop or slow down type of operation that the remote operator does, but it is not actually remotely driving the vehicle. So here I've gone over the different modes of teleoperation, and as you've seen in the example that I showed before, these modes are not, there are, maybe call them continuous flow from one mode to another. Different vehicles might have different subsets of these modes, but we expect to see multiple modes on vehicles, and maybe in the same drive, multiple modes initiated and used by the remote operator. So maybe this completes the taxonomy. Brad, handing it off to you.
No, that gives some idea of the different levels of technology. I'm sorry, I shouldn't use that word levels, but the different styles of technology that can be applied here and that they're applied in different places. Now, the goal of almost everyone working in self-driving is to get full autonomy as many places as they can. It's just they know that there are going to be areas where they're not going to do it. And that's why they look to this technology. There are some companies, though, that are operating entirely with remote assistance. They're not, at least yet, in a place where they can do any autonomy. But the big companies are all trying to do as much autonomy as they can. In fact, they want to have areas where they know they never need any remote assistance or almost never need it, but may want to occasionally serve areas where they can't. But let's get to the big question I'm sure is on everyone's mind. It's one of the reasons at first that people wondered whether or not you could do that, which is the network. We've all experienced, even on every Zoom call, you experience problems with the network. There are latency issues. There are failures in the network. There are dark zones where there just isn't connectivity. Now that's improving right now with time. We're getting better and better cell networks. They're spending more and more money on it. They're putting 5G in more and more places, which offers guarantees of latency and network quality of service. And so that helps with that. But perfection is never going to be there. Starlink offers connectivity anywhere that you can see the sky, which is out on all the freeways and so on, although it doesn't offer right now at least a lot of upstream if you want to look out a lot of HD video cameras in multiple places. But nonetheless, the network will get better, but never perfect. So what do we do to deal with these issues where the network is not going to serve us? Especially, by the way, by surprise. Do you have any comment on that, Doron?
Oh, sorry. So this is maybe where DriveU comes in, and our technology really tries to overcome these various options, various issues that are encountered. For example, latency, as Brad said, network failures and dark zones. We do this by a mix of solutions, which includes dynamic video encoding, so shifting and changing the video encoding rate to adapt to the actual network capacity, and also working simultaneously on multiple networks, so we don't have a single point of failure or one single operator that causes us an issue. And our whole system is designed for a super low latency environment, sub 100 milliseconds on an LT network. So these are the type of things that we do to overcome these issues.
But the vehicles then have to either get to a minimum risk maneuver or stop if they run into a problem where the network isn't meeting these requirements, even the multiple networks, because it can still happen. You can have 3 SIMs and talking to 3 different networks, but you can still find a place where you're not getting a connection.
Yes, that does happen. That's an issue. But again, we are first and foremost, a mission accomplishment solution. So if we solve 99 or 999 out of 1,000 or 99 out of 100, that's a huge saving and a huge benefit for the autonomous operator. And it especially enables them to accelerate the deployment of the vehicles and not wait until the system is so mature that it solves all the issues. Again, we're talking about mission accomplishment, not about safety.
Well, so there's been a lot of debate and controversy in San Francisco over the last few weeks and Cruise has been more guilty than Waymo, but some of the robotaxis there have been finding themselves simply stuck because their systems cannot figure out what to do, and they put on the flashers and they're blocking the street, which is annoying people. And the press on that seemed to suggest it was happening all the time. On the positive side of it, recently it was released that the San Francisco Transit Agency, known as the Muni, had asked all of their drivers to log every time they did encounter any problem with one of the robotaxis in the city. And Wired Magazine actually got those logs and discovered that there had only been 12 incidents in about the last 6.5 months where the vehicles had caused a problem for transit. There were more incidents than this. There were incidents that were not detected by the transit drivers and a variety of others. But I was actually, as a fan of this technology, I was actually pretty pleased I thought that was much better a number than I was going to see. The truth is, human beings block traffic all the time. We kind of suck. We double park and we have cars that break down and a lot of other things happen. And right now, the robots aren't as good as human beings. They are blocking traffic a little more than the human beings are. But this is something that we're quite used to tolerating on our streets. And so that if we can get this technology, which is in the end going to improve traffic flow down the road when it's deployed at scale, and it's going to improve safety a lot when it's deployed at scale. If we have a few problems when it's in the teething pain period with small fleets, I think that's actually a pretty good trade-off. But people are debating that right now. But it was interesting to get real hard data about it. Now, one thing that's not happening with Cruise and Waymo, which I'm a little bit disappointed with them in, is that they are afraid of using remote assistance in a number of situations. Whenever we hear about one of these situations where the Waymo vehicle or Cruise vehicle has just sat there in the street for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, it's because they evaluated that situation with their remote operators and they said, we're not 100% confident that even our remote operator, which doesn't take the wheel, as you say, it just provides path planning assistance. He or she just provides path planning assistance. We're not fully confident in that happening with remote assistance. So they actually send what I call a rescue driver. I don't know what term they use for it. This is they have people stationed around the city who scoot over there as quickly as possible. Two people, obviously, because someone has to take the vehicle away unless they have a scooter. And they get in the car and they drive it away and they resolve the situation. But that can take 5 to 10 minutes. And because of that, it does involve more traffic blocking. But it's working. They're not having safety incidents because of this. I run into people who think, okay, even stopping in the street is a horrible safety risk. I don't think it is. I think it's something that we tolerate, and we tolerate young student drivers also being confused and blocking traffic from time to time in order to turn them into more mature drivers. So by and large, it's working out. I'm a little more concerned, or some people are concerned, that if you ever want to have rural operations, I was just doing a little road trip in California last week, and it amazes me every time that in the richest state and the richest country in the world, there's still lots of places where you cannot get data connectivity. And you're certainly, if you're going to depend on road operation, you're not going to have autonomous service in those zones until such time as they change that game. Maybe Elon Musk will change it. I don't know. But for now, that's not been the situation.
Yes, it's. I will be launching a poll. Maybe ask the people, the participants, what they feel about the AV timeline. Asking, when do you believe that is a realistic timeline for autonomous vehicles to happen? And by happen, we mean over 20 cities, over 1 million vehicles of all types. Driver, think how far away are we?
Because some people say, when are they going to happen? Now, if you live in San Francisco, they happened already. They happened in Phoenix, Arizona, and particularly in Chandler, a suburb there. And there are other places that may not see it for quite some time. It's not something that just suddenly shows up and it's all around the world, like an electric car. You can buy a Tesla and you can drive it to countries where they've never heard of electric cars, and it still drives. That's not true with the autonomous vehicles. And so this is a very hard question to answer because it depends a lot on the economics, raising the capital, all those other things. Looking at our audience, though, they're relatively on the pessimistic scale of this. Most people picking at least 6 years, only a few people picking anything less than that. And if you've put this bar on it that you did of 1 million vehicles, I can understand why people have that later viewpoint. But we're actually seeing about 40% of the people are in the more than 8-year category. And so that's not actually too bad. Now, one of the attendees started off right away by asking about how do vehicles decide when they want help. Now, there are two ways that it can be decided a vehicle wants help. One is the vehicle decides it and then signals, please someone come and look at my problem and fix it. And the other one is when you have somebody supervising, and the supervisor obviously can say, okay, there's something going on here and I need to do it. What have you seen in terms of how people are making that decision? And in particular, Are they being very conservative about it, or are they asking for help at any confusion, which can slow traffic, or are they being too lax about it and not asking for help when they really need it?
So first of all, I did launch another poll
Oh, okay.
regarding the need for human assistance.
We'll keep them distracted.
Yes, that's right. So I think that's a big issue, and this handoff and the having this interaction between the remote operator and autonomous vehicle is an art in itself, an art in terms of how do you do the best human-machine interface. But I think it's something that's possible, and something that's working on making this interaction best is something that's very important for us as a company.
Yeah. Well, so we're seeing again the audience divided on this question of whether this happens in 10 years. These are vehicles that have no need for remote assistance, at least within their service area. And this is what always complicates this. While there are people who talk about what they'll call a level 5 car, a car that just drives everywhere, a car that can handle all situations, that I've always viewed as a somewhat science fictional goal. And the reason it's science fictional is economic, which is to say that it's not necessarily worth it to certify and test and develop your vehicle so that it can go down absolutely every possible street and situation in the world, simply because if you can make those rare situations rare enough, human assistance is a viable thing, especially as we see a world where there are things like Starlink or satellite connectivity or very ubiquitous mobile connectivity to say, look, I don't need to go down your uncle's driveway on a dirt road. I don't need to be able to handle that road that's driven 2 times a year up to the antenna tower, which is in theory what you'd have to ask for if you had this so-called level 5, this drive everywhere intelligence. What I need to do is make it commercially viable. I need to make it something that that operates. It doesn't cost too much to operate it, so it doesn't need too many human operators. It's no good to have a human operator all the time, one-to-one. You really haven't saved that much money over having Uber drivers in the vehicles. You've saved a little bit, though, by the way, because one nice thing about remote operation is that no human is needed while the vehicle is idle. A lot of the cost of your Uber is the fact that Uber driver is sitting there waiting for a ride. In fact, I've been reading here at the airport in San Francisco, they're waiting an hour to get a ride. And, they pick up their phone, they do other stuff. Maybe they even have a gig job, work for that hour laptop. I don't know what they're doing. But one way or another, there's a cost to them sitting there for an hour. And the great thing about, even if you're relying heavily on remote supervision and operation, is there is no cost for the robot to wait. There's a pool of people who solve problems, and they're brought in when they're actually needed. So there are some economics gained. In fact, I've just on my podcast a couple of weeks ago interviewed a fellow who's got a startup where they deliver cars to you, and they're using remote assistance in order to get the car. At least they plan to use it. Right now they're sending a human being, but they deliver the car to you and then you drive it, and then they pick it up. And so they only need to have human involvement at that beginning and end of the trip. And as a result, you can again be very economic. And it really, in the end, it is of course about technology, but it's as much about money. And anyway, our audience came out slightly on the yes side, but not very, no really strong view plus or minus on this poll.
Yes, and if I may add to the economic aspects, for delivery robots, this is even more pronounced. Same thing for trucking, which enables you to have, the remote driver. Imagine that you have delivery robots in multiple restaurants, and even if you do need teleoperations for the delivery robots, you can have the remote operator operate from one restaurant to another, and then handle the various peaks that happen with each restaurant, irrespective of the actual physical location. They can actually be in different cities. This way, this is a huge economic benefit.
I mean, I actually, earlier today, I did a interview with some folks from Enride, a trucking company in Sweden. And I haven't released it yet, so I can't go and watch it now, but later on you'll be able to watch it. But they're in that they're really focusing on using this technology to enable electric trucks. And one problem with electric trucks is they do have to spend a fair bit of time recharging. And if you have a human being sit around waiting while they're recharging, that has a cost. Particularly if you want to do an overnight charge, of course, where you're using up a large number of hours of a person's time. And so they believe they can make, the issues with electric trucks are the weight of the battery, of course, but also this charging time and the charging costs. And if you don't have to charge fast, you can just wait or switch tractors and so on. Again, no human being involved. And the human being gets to live at home with their family. Today, truck driving is a job that is hard to fill because people don't really enjoy it, because you spend a week, if you take a long haul truck route, you spend a week away from your home and family. You sleep in the back of a truck or in a motel or truck stop. It's not a great thing, and this is also something that you can, even if you need a fair bit of human oversight, it can still make sense to do it from an economic standpoint.
I agree. Maybe our last poll for today regarding the various teleoperations technologies or modes that we mentioned before. To hear which modes you think are relevant and will be used. This should be a multiple choice responses, so you can answer from multiple options. It's interesting to note we have customers that are using all different types of these modes. So these are not theoretical modes. We have actually customers using direct drive, low-level control, high-level control, guidance, advisory, supervision, and so forth.
I mean, direct drive was the original drone sort of thing. I have a friend who his weekend job used to be bombing the Taliban from a little remote base. So the United States has stopped doing that. And it's kind of gruesome. But of course, that was, these remote flown drones, which are, they have a little bit of automation in them, but they're mostly real, fully trained pilots who are flying them. But on the ground, that doesn't fly, shall we say?
Yes.
Well, we're seeing people just basically clicking on all of them, so that's not very interesting. However, the slight winner, I don't know if you've shown the results to people yet, but the slight winner is the high-level control idea, which is, just the joy. Well, I know the guiding is now moving up, but anyway, I'm not too surprised at this result. The important points, I believe, is does it let you have a service in more areas, and does it do it economically? And that's the aim of these technologies.
Yes, and I'm not surprised that there are so many responses and people choosing multiple options, because I think different modes have different advantages and disadvantages. And this is the benefit of having these multiple modes.
So getting back to the audience, Ryan Jones, who works in public transit, is wondering what happens if you have 10 vehicles per operator. Does that mean that the operator might take too much time to get to a vehicle? And I think, of course, the usual plan that most companies I've seen do is that you don't try and pare it down so that if you need a 10-to-1 ratio, you have exactly 1/10 the number of people. You do have to provision so that you can handle the peak demand and make sure you will indeed get someone on a vehicle very quickly. I don't know what people have planned to do if they suddenly see a surge in demand and suddenly there's more requests for remote assistance. Do they have on-call people who can be grabbed in during that surge? What are people doing in order to make sure that this doesn't happen, where a vehicle asks for help and it says, "I'm sorry, all of our agents are busy assisting other vehicles. Your drive is very important to us." We don't want that. Robots don't mind hold music, but you don't want that in when it comes to remote assist.
I agree. First of all, the DriveU solution does offer scaling up, supporting thousands of vehicles. And this is something that we support today, including dynamic allocation between vehicle to pilot. So this is something available. We do see cases where there is a remote operator can be called up and say, please connect. And I'm guessing that it will probably be a type of Uber-like surge pricing, offering higher prices on these peak times. The big advantages of teleoperations, especially if it's possible to do that from home, and in some cases it is possible to do it from home, maybe not for semi-trailers or large trucks, but for delivery robots for sure, is that this also opens up the opportunity for people that otherwise would not be able to join the workforce. So people with handicaps or limitations, either personal or physical. This opens up people to the workspace that otherwise would not be able to be there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. I've heard of some companies who, well, they're, let's put it this way, they're certainly more customer service focused than my cable company. And what they do is, if there is a surge and customers need attention, the CEO's phone literally rings and the CEO resolves their customer problem. Actually, the CEO is probably not very well trained in handling the customer problem, but someone who is trained, who is certainly not doing this the regular job, managers and so on, and doing that, people at home. You obviously don't want to call them suddenly. What you do is you notice that you're running out of resources and you bring on more with enough warning, so that if you suddenly get this big problem. Now, I hope that all the companies that do this game it out and do sort of test runs as to how will we handle a an earthquake, because it could be in an earthquake that suddenly there's a really huge volume of vehicles that all need service. Now, it's also true in that situation that it's kind of tolerated if many of the vehicles have to pause for a little bit longer in order to get it figured out, because it is that very unusual situation. But it's definitely something that you'd want to see companies do in simulation, make sure that they can handle these extreme loads. And I assume you're also saying that there will be sort of third-party companies that have people who can be summoned for a higher price when you've run out of your own people. Is that what we're hoping to see happen in an industry?
So regarding the last point, definitely. I think this is an opportunity for, different types of workspaces and different types of business models for additional companies. Regarding the question of what happens, for example, earthquake, or let's give, maybe not a catastrophe, maybe it's a great situation where you have everybody going to a stadium and all of a sudden everybody wanting to drive out of the stadium. What happens then? So both for disasters and for just man-made type of cases, we do have load balancing mechanisms. We do have redundancies. So even if our servers in California might fail because of an issue, we would have backup servers either in, I don't know, would be in Portland or Seattle, or maybe it would be in Texas. And these would be coming up online and then providing the service. Same thing with remote pilots. So if a service area gets affected, we do hope that the ecosystem becomes mature enough that there will be the option to call people for hire when needed. And I hope that it will not be in the last second, but people will see. And maybe the last point is we are working with mobile operators and equipment vendors to interface and to integrate APIs so that the network can also update us on what is happening from the network side, so that we do have the ability to react to network related issues. So maybe it's not an earthquake, maybe there's just an outage in one of the operators' networks in Southern California. So if we know about this, we react accordingly.
Yeah, well, of course, some earthquakes or Hurricane Katrina shut off the cell network. Of course, nobody was driving in the Hurricane Katrina flood situation. But anyway, the point is that these disasters definitely are things which are not unknown to us. And the important thing is to make sure that companies know that they need to, role play or war game basically these disaster scenarios and make sure that they actually are robust against them. And I say that, and many people say that, but it needs repeating because there are companies that haven't really thought through that yet and aren't planning to do it. But I hope that they all will have by a certain amount of time. But you had said that you like to see, good low latency for this to go well. So is it going to be possible for someone in India to be remote operating a vehicle in California?
So again, this maybe brings us to the modes of teleoperations. If we look at low-level control, then low latency is critical, but the higher layer, the higher mode teleoperations that we use, the higher latency that we're willing to accept. So if, for example, I look at a advisory type of or guidance type of mode, then we're willing to accept much higher latency. And in this case, India is certainly an option for supporting operations in the US. For robots which are driving, delivery robots or other robots driving at slower speeds, we do see operations in India being supported in the US. So this is something feasible and possible.
Well, that's, I mean, that's good. Obviously, what you can also do is prioritize and say, what we need here is a low latency operation, so we will assign the closer people, closer in the network sense, to that job. And then here we see something where 2 or 3 seconds of response time would not be an issue, and they could be on the other side of the planet. So.
Oh, wait. No, not 2, 3 seconds. We're talking about half a second. Half a second.
Oh, you haven't had some of the phone calls with India I've had. No, I mean, admittedly, they rarely have 3 seconds of latency. But no, if it's just, the police officer is giving hand gestures and telling me where to go on a detour, 3 seconds response is perfectly fine for that, I think. I mean, it certainly works. I mean, I guess I shouldn't call it perfectly fine. But if the car takes 3 seconds before it then realizes its plan is to turn left here because the police have said turn left when it wants to go straight, I think that's something you can do within that amount of time.
Fair enough. Yeah, I agree.
All right, that's not a question. That's a comment. Any other questions from you? I have one other. Well, let me get into one other little video that I put in here. And this is a video of made in a Waymo about 1.5 years ago. And again, I don't know if you hear the sound or not, but this was an example of using remote assistance where a car was stuck because of cones on the road that it didn't understand the way the cones had been placed, and the operator gave the car wrong instructions. It basically said, no, that lane that's coned off, it is drivable. The operator just made a mistake. Human beings make mistakes. And this resulted in a bit of a comedy for Waymo because the car went into the cones, stopped for a while, thought about it for a minute, suddenly started going. Amusingly, they had sent someone to go and collect the car and fix it. And the car raced away just as the rescue driver was arriving. So it seemed like it was, trying to escape. So what do we do about the fact that humans make mistakes in these sorts of situations? I mean, here you can see it actually sort of halfway into a coned off lane. This was a big embarrassment for Waymo, and this was, by the way, to give Waymo and other companies credit, the companies that let the public release random videos of what they're doing are the companies I trust the most, because that means that their mistakes are being recorded and being shown. A lot of companies, they just publish a video that the company made of their car driving and saying, look how great we are, we can drive. And of course, they throw away the video where they made mistakes. It's only when you're getting an unfiltered look at what they do that you actually can judge how well they're doing. And this was an example of them not doing very well. It wasn't a safety issue. The car was just stopped in the wrong lane. A few cars had to go around it. You could make an extreme argument for why it might be a safety issue. But what do we do if the humans are making mistakes as well as the software?
So great question. And I think this is one of the things I try to emphasize. How do we create this interaction between the pilot and the vehicle, and having the vehicle be able to validate that the pilot is doing something acceptable? We call this internally the sandwich model. So maybe the vehicle is very, will stop for, as the example I said before, even a leaf falling in front of the truck will cause it to stop. But there will be some basic safety mechanisms that the vehicle will not enable the remote pilot to override. And the remote pilot will be able to solve various types of problems. We also see different levels of supervision within the remote operations. So the remote operation center might have maybe even in some cases 2 operators, one supervising and one doing a remote operations to make sure that a critical operation is done correctly.
Mm-hmm. All right. Another famous incident of operator mistake, the first incident where a cruise was pulled over by police was because its lights were off, and the robot does not turn its lights off at night. It turns out a remote operator had turned the lights off, and so we got to finally answer this question. Because, by the way, for so many years, everyone say, what are the police going to do when they want to pull it over? So, I mean, it turns out people thought about that, and they did have solutions for it. But the reason it happened was not because of a software mistake. It turned out to be well, I'd say there's still a software mistake there, because crews probably should have thought about the fact that if the human operator says turn off the lights and it's nighttime, the software should have said, do you really want to turn off the lights in the middle of the night? And maybe corrected their mistake. Of course, we all hate those "do you really want to" prompts, don't we? And we want to turn them off. So a couple of other questions have come in. One person asks about how about doing buses where on a bus the person suggests you got 50 seats and so you only have one driver for 50 people, which is a pretty good performance ratio. And although surprisingly drivers are still the biggest cost of most transit agencies, that's in part because they get their vehicles from grants. So drivers are a bigger part of it. One mistake about this question is that, at rush hour you have buses with 50 people on them. The average bus in the United States has 9 people in it. And so the number isn't quite as good as this. So the economics of buses, we wish they were better. In fact, the American Department of Energy actually calculates that the average transit bus in the United States uses more fuel per passenger mile than the average car. While you may have a dream that buses are efficient and they have lower emissions and stuff like that, let me get rid of that little video behind me. It turns out it doesn't really happen, at least not when you look at the whole system. But I do think, actually, the reason we haven't seen the pilots taken out of the planes and the drivers taken out of the buses is a high priority. Like, people have been automating planes for a long time, but we don't take the pilots out. And one reason is, there's 200 people on the plane and a couple of pilots. So economically, the win isn't as much. Although there's a lot of talk about moving planes to one pilot in the plane and one remote pilot. Because, yes, you can guarantee connectivity to vehicles in the air. And so that's not an issue. And of course, drones and military aircraft are flying without any pilots in them and have for some long amount of time. And that actually might have a significant cost savings, particularly on those long haul flights where they have to have 2 sets of crews and one crew sleeps while the other crew is there. So you've got 4 pilots on the plane. And if you could use remote pilots, I actually think that there's people seriously investigating that. So as far as the bus is concerned, you'll probably see it happen eventually too.
And with that, I think sorry, Dawn, you wanted to say something more?
No, I think we've run out of time.
Yes, well, I'll answer one last question that came in, I think, from Chad Badri, who has asked about, what about the operator in India not following a police officer's orders and who's breaking the law? So generally, I think almost all remote operation, in fact, all self-driving vehicles, long ago, the people making it said, okay, we are clearly liable for what a vehicle does. The company operating it is liable, whether it's the company that made the software, whether it's the company that runs the fleet. They're taking full legal and civil liability. If they hire an employee to do the work, they have vicarious liability for anything that's going on. So I don't think there'll be an issue about jurisdiction, in that the company operating a vehicle in the United States is going to have presence in the United States, and it's going to be subject to the jurisdictions of the United States, even if it hires an Indian to do the work, and that Indian makes a mistake.
For sure.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you to Brad and to Doron, and thank you to all of you who joined us today. As I mentioned in the beginning, you will be receiving the recording, and we definitely hope that you found this session beneficial. If you do want to contact us in any way, then our email is info@driveu.auto. Feel free to contact us, or in any other means of communication. Thank you, everybody.
And for those wanting to see more of my stuff, I have a website, robocars.com. Mostly that points to my blog, ideas.forbrad.com. You'll find the links there, and also to my YouTube channel. So I'll see you again, perhaps, in one of those venues.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks to all for coming.
Thank you, everyone.